company crashed. We were voted worst company in the world 2 years in a row. The stock, yeah. I mean, we lost to, I think it was Exxon. Remember when they blew up? There was an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico that blew up and killed like 1 billion life forms. We lost to them. And we went through this kind of cathartic self-examination, and I stuck it through because I cared about the company. I loved EA, still do. And I wanted to, and I was pissed. This is not the company I joined. This is not the company that I was a part of building. And I didn't believe that this is how it should end, right?
Hey everyone, it's Justin Kan back with another Secret Stash podcast. I'm joined by my co-host, Archie Stonehill.
Hey everyone.
And today we have a very special guest, Frank Gibeau, CEO of Zynga. He's been CEO of Zynga since 2016 and got him here to talk about the last decade and then his storied career at Electronic Arts. Yeah, so under his leadership, Zynga's expanded its mobile dominance, acquiring a bunch of studios like Peak Games and Rollic, and was recently acquired by Take-Two Interactive. Take it away, Archie. You want to ask the first question? Oh, we got to share. Today we're sharing a mic, so you'll see some awkward mic sharing here. We did not prepare sufficiently for this podcast. So, Archie.
Really good to have you here, Frank.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, today we'll be talking about Frank's time at Zynga and particularly, some of the movement they've made into direct to consumer as well as some of their acquisitions. But to begin with, we'll probably be starting with his career at EA. But before that, I guess, we're here after GDC, so we could kick off by just asking how your GDC has been.
Oh, yeah, I think it's been great. It's been a action-packed, 5 days, seen a lot of people, back-to-back dinners. I think it's 3 dinners a night, 2 lunches a day, and 3 breakfasts. But it's really fun to see all the people that you've come up with in the industry, see all the new ideas, talk to a lot of people about what's working, what's not working. I come away very optimistic from the week. I think there's a lot of things about the gaming industry that are grabbing the headlines about why it's not great, why it's doom and gloom. But I think the worst of it's kind of behind us, and now it's really looking at the next couple of years in hardware. The slates on PC and console look particularly good, and I think in mobile there's a lot of green shoots. It's a tough environment for certain types of things like customer acquisition, but in a lot of ways there's a ton of innovation happening in how new games are getting created, how we're finding markets, how emerging markets are starting development, changes in development with regards to new tools like AI. So I think there's a lot of, as you kind of look out of the medium to long term, I think I'm very optimistic. In the short term, I think we're through most of it. There might be a little bit more here and there, but in general, I'm optimistic. Always have been about games.
Yeah, I would echo your sentiment that I feel more optimistic than the headlines capture. I think obviously layoffs are obviously been affecting the industry, and that's terrible. I think really hope that's behind us now. From a kind of industry growth perspective, I think though that there's been a lot of narratives about mobile in particular declining, and we were speaking about this yesterday, that perhaps those headlines don't capture a lot of what's happening underneath kind of the numbers, because one of the things we care about a lot at Stash, and you guys have been a market leader on, is direct to consumer. And we heard a particular story about, this is kind of funny, but Niantic was someone we know wrote an article about Niantic.
Great company,
and they're declining Pokemon Go numbers. And then funnily enough, Niantic actually then came and corrected that and said, actually, the App Store numbers don't capture direct to consumer. Right. And so we've actually seen revenue growth, not decline. It's funny because normally most studios are like hiding their direct to consumer revenue a little bit. But I think more broadly, that does demonstrate that a lot of the top line revenue declines could be masking underlying just shifts in where players are spending.
Yeah, I think there's 2 things at play. I literally had the same conversation this week where somebody I know said, "Oh, your game is declining." I said, "No, actually, I didn't see you in our data rooms. It's actually going up because of that exact measurement issue. Direct to consumer is exploding. It's something that we've, as you mentioned earlier, believed in for a very long time. Anytime you can get a close one-to-one relationship with your players, that's the way you got to go. Getting platforms out of the way is always a good move, and we really have seen the momentum pick up on whether it's APKs on Android or our mobile direct store and some of our web plays. So that's not counted in the Sensor Tower data. Advertising's not in the Sensor Tower data, and so we're finding really interesting ways to monetize, and our partnership with AppLovin is going really well. So when you start to look at, what am I reading? It used to be a problem when in the old days when you look at video game sales. Oh, it's all of retail except Walmart. Well, Walmart's a third of the market, right? So you'd have these huge error rates in what analysts were seeing. And so I completely can confirm that the Niantic stuff for us is absolutely true. That it's really quite good time for us. We're having a great run in mobile, and a lot of the new things that we've been innovating, taking hyper casual techniques of how to find audience, how to gather signal on something's good or can scale, is really starting to pay out for us combined with our direct stuff. So we're excited. The joke we make is mobile's a red ocean, but it's good if you're a shark.
Yeah.
So-
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you guys have, I think, well, maybe we could get to that a little
Yeah.
bit later. I would love to talk about your portfolio strategy at Zynga, because you have, I think, the most interesting collection of studios of any one developer out there in terms of breadth. But maybe rewinding, we could start
Sure.
with your career at EA, which I believe is where you even started most of your career in games.
Yeah, no, look, I'm a homer. I've been in games since '91. I joined Electronic Arts right out of university. I graduated USC, came back up to the Silicon Valley, and I saw a job for a tester and a marketing assistant role at Electronic Arts for flight simulators. And I went down and interviewed. They had Nerf balls all over the ground, and the TVs were going with Amiga games, and it was heaven, right? Because I had grown up around computers and playing games and pirating games on the Apple II, and all that stuff. So for me, it was like I didn't even know you could have a career in this. And so I interviewed for the position and I got in. It was entry level, making $21,000 a year. Working around the clock, never left the building, right? It was just you finish, your 8 hour shift in marketing, you'd go do customer service, you'd go test some games for the guys upstairs. And it's just been it feels like it was yesterday, but it's been just Electronic Arts for about 23 years. Then a short break. I flunked retirement. I had about 6 months there. Joined Zynga, and then when Take-Two acquired us, we've been working with them now for the last couple of years. So it's been an unbelievably great career, tremendous friendships, life experiences. Worked on so many great games over the course of my career and learned a lot. So I'm very fortunate.
And you began your career in product marketing, is that right?
Yeah, so it was literally a marketing assistant on flight simulators, on Chuck Yeager's Air Combat, Birds of Prey, and then I also helped out on Road Rash, Sega Genesis, and Desert Strike. EA had invested in Amiga and had a lot of 16-bit technologies, and had built a clean room and was building reverse engineering Sega Genesis games. And so I literally joined when that was happening, and we cranked out a position on Sega Genesis because we had not done well on 8-bit on Nintendo. And and then I started doing what they did. They had rotational jobs when you first got to EA, where you would go through different. I did telesales. I did customer service where people were calling about literally folding their 5.5-inch disc and sticking it in a 3.5-inch drive. We're like, no, it doesn't work that way. And so the early days were pretty wild. And as a guy, when you'd finish at like 6 or 7, you'd go upstairs and work with guys like Paul Grace or Rich Hilleman or Ben Gordon and start pounding away on The Immortal or Road Rash or whatever and just doing testing. And so it was really fun, vibrant time. And the company had just gone public and was just on a rocket ship. It was great.
It's awesome. I think Road Rash was the first game I ever played.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Like, what was one where you could fight a
Motorcycle combat
right? Yeah,
racing.
yeah.
I think it's interesting to look at how you started your career versus where you spent the last decade, because I would have thought that the nature of product marketing in particular, but in many ways games, for a live service game versus a premium game, I mean, it's a completely different ball game. So when did you start to transition from, well, retail sales, right? Like, I'm sure product placement, your
Right.
relationship with the retailers, when did that start to transition more towards the kinds of games you work with now?
Right. Well, look, Electronic Arts back in those days had a real culture for product management. It was a different time and place. There was no internet. You had no direct data feeds. Live services wasn't a thing. You literally put the cartridge in a box, and it went right. And maybe you would do post launch, post mortem kind of work where you do some qualitative testing, see, hey, would you like about this? I always found I learned more from the games that didn't sell than I learned from the games that did sell. So I'd go and try and figure out like, well, why didn't this connect with players? And what I really gravitated to was working with creative teams, engineering teams on what are we building and who's it for, and making sure that connection was right. That the messaging of the game, that the The actual feature set, the capabilities were exactly what somebody was looking for and was going to be blown away by. And so I always took that perspective into my any role that I was in, whether it was a studio or a publishing job. But the basic idea of product management being the hub for all of these different things is great. I think it's the best job in business because you get to see everything and you get to influence everything, and you're the ultimate kind of you get to work with the ultimate judge, which is the customer in the market, right? And you have to be the voice of that to a degree back into the organization, right or wrong. And so in the early days at EA, we would work very hard around positioning. We do a lot of testing, and we do a lot of qualitative research to make sure that we had the right feature sets, the games had the right feels, and then you would build out what we called it. Can we work with the teams to make the games better through research, competitive teardowns? Can we build a world-class campaign, advertising, retail, and then sweat the details, deliver the results at the end? Did the sell-through happen? And then, how it moved through its life cycle. What did we learn about it for the next game? And so that was kind of what we did.
When something didn't work, I'm curious how you got the data or like how you learned from it.
Well, it would release on a Tuesday, and by
Yeah.
Thursday, GameStop would call us or Toys R Us and say it's a bomb.
Yeah.
There was a game called Shaq Fu. Have you ever heard of this game?
I think I remember
Oh my
that.
God,
Yeah.
it's a classic. It was they came up with this idea of taking basketball players, Michael Jordan and Shaquille O'Neal, and putting them in action games.
Yeah.
And so this was literally a fighting game on Sega Genesis with Shaq,
That's the
Shaquille
main
O'Neal,
character, right?
as the main character doing all of his kung fu stuff. Except that on the Sega Genesis, he was about 3 inches tall, right, in the fighting. So
Yeah.
it was kind of absurd. It just didn't translate, right? I wasn't on the project directly, but it was one of those classics where and it was a huge launch, spent a lot of money on it. And it goes out on a Tuesday, and literally the lead buyer at Toys R Us calls our head of sales, Nancy Smith, and says, "It's a disaster. We didn't move any units, and so you're screwed at that point, right? Because you have so many weeks a hand of cartridges.
Yeah.
And it's not digital, right? You own these cartridges, right? And so what we do is we'd say, okay, what the hell happened? EA was really good about asking hard questions and going through the postmortem. What worked, what didn't work, and what do we do about it? And so that it was always wanted to be a 1 sheet, maybe a 2 sheet. And you go out and you throw a bunch of techniques at it. You go talk to editors at the CGW or GamePro or whoever it was. You'd go out and get customers people who didn't buy the game, have them play it, and then tell you what they thought. Try and find people through reg cards or other kind of primitive, techniques to find people and ask them what worked, what didn't you like, and that sort of thing. And we try and distill these things down quickly and then go to the next thing and say, okay, well, this is why this failed. That one was pretty egregious. But if you have, when we finished Desert Strike, we wanted to figure out, well, why didn't you want to play it? Well, I wanted to play more vehicles than helicopters, so the next one, maybe we could add a tank or a boat or something like that. Madden football, we'd look at, because we had an annualized cycle, we'd look at what features scored, which ones didn't, and then iterate on them, and incrementally improve them year to year. And so that technique was kind of core what product management was making the games better. And we were relentless about competitive teardowns. Really, if we were building a shooter or a racing game, you put them all against each other. Now, when you started getting to connected games, then we got huge data feeds that would come in and tell you, we'd put all the instrumentation in the game and get the data feeds and what game events are working, where are people dying, where are they not dying inside the game, how far are they getting, and that changed everything. Product management went from being, I don't know, almost an individualistic art form to much more systematic. The tools got better. You got a lot more people in the roles because the business was growing. There were a lot more people coming into the industry. And then when I was at EA, I had gone through publishing and studio, and I'd done mainly console and PC up until about 2013. And then in 2013, I moved over to lead the mobile division at EA. And that was the period of time when it was going from premium feature phone version business model where you'd get on a carrier's deck, or you get on Apple and Google. It was $1.99, 99 cents, whatever you download it, and that was it. But now it was moving to free to play. All the innovation that was coming from Korea and China was coming back into the US. And so we were flipping the entire business from premium to free to play. And so we were trying to figure out how to do that. And of course, at the core of that is live services and understanding data. And so we were really embarked on that. Now, there were a number of companies that were way ahead of us on that, Zynga being one at the time on Facebook. And we would hire like a D-level product manager from Zynga. They'd come into EA and they'd be like, hey, like telling us things that we just had no idea. So we had to build that from scratch. And so I called my last 2 years at EA getting my PhD in mobile. And so we learned it I learned it from the ground up. I learned what skill sets translate from console and PC effectively to mobile and which don't. Like design is a disaster. I mean, you go from a premium business model where you get $60 and it's, and you have session lengths of an hour or 2 hours, and you don't have to worry about monetizing and engagement and multiple sessions a day. And I found that engineers and producers made the transition no problem. But the design function and the product management function were problematic. And what we found was it was almost better to start with somebody who was fresh and didn't have the baggage of building a premium game or marketing a premium game, and have them just come in fresh and learn. But some people made the transition. I like to think I did. And it was about being really open to unlearning and getting rid of a lot of muscle memory and starting fresh on how to think about it. But some of the fundamentals were still the same. Who is this game for? How do we find them? How do we, what do they like? What do they not like? How valuable are they? And then what do we, in the game development process, how do we bring that voice into the development so that the creative teams can make the best calls? Because ultimately that's what they're doing. I don't know if that was helpful.
That's super helpful. Yeah, I love that. How did that prepare you you got your PhD and then
Yeah.
prepared you for Zynga, presumably?
There was probably 2 or 3 things from EA that were absolutely fundamental to the success we had at Zynga from my perspective of me. Number one was I had been through a turnaround. So, at Electronic Arts, when you come in 91, you go on this vertical tear all the way up to the early 2000s, where the company was just the apex predator of packaged goods video games, right? We just mastered it. And we blew it on the digital transition to online. And that's when the company went through a huge shock and we started to drop. Well, obviously there were some economy things going to in 2008, et cetera. But we went and we got arrogant and we did things that were more in the interest of our business model than our players. And the company crashed. We were voted worst company in the world 2 years in a row. The stock, yeah. I mean, we lost to, I think it was Exxon. Remember when they blew up there was an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico that blew up and killed like 1 billion life forms. We lost to them, meaning we won, right? We were the worst company even Comcast, we were worse than Comcast, right? So we're in this situation where we go from here, zero to hero back to zero, right? Our stocks trading at an all-time low. Everybody hates us. Execs are leaving left and right. And we went through this kind of cathartic self-examination, and I stuck it through because I cared about the company. I loved EA, still do, and I was pissed. This is not the company I joined. This is not the company that I was a part of building, and I didn't believe that this was how it should end, right? And every week we were rumored to being bought by somebody, right? I think our stock was trading at $11, and so we actually had this moment. I remember a couple of things that happened along the way. One was really interesting was we all went in a room, probably about a dozen of us, and we had whiteboards all through the room. And we basically said, let's write down everything our customers hate about us. Seriously. And we went up and we wrote them down on the board. Whether it was a business practice like online access, which was meant to fight rentals. If you remember when you did rent a game, you log on to EA Online, you had to pay us for it. Great business model for the company. Terrible for players and customers, right? And then we wrote down like a dozen of these, right? No, probably more like 100 of them. And we prioritized them and we went after them. We said, okay, we're not going to do that anymore. Shut that down, shut that down, shut that down. And we basically said we're going to, one step at a time, build our way back. And it was awesome. I mean, the most fun I had and the most kind of rewarding part of my career is when you do hit rock bottom and everybody counts you out and then you come back up. And so what I found is I really liked fixing things, and I loved going into teams that weren't performing at their potential, and making some adjustments and some analysis happen, and then leading them to that position of success. That was the most fun I had. So first off was I'd been through a transition, through a turnaround, hero to zero, back to hero. Number two was I'd been around a lot of acquisition, good ones and bad ones. Whether it was Maxis and Westwood back in the old days, or BioWare, DICE, pretty much every PopCap, every acquisition at EA I'd been around or been directly involved in, and I learned along the way what worked and what didn't work. And then, finally, I'd done that 2-year PhD in mobile. So when I walked into Zynga, I was relaxed. I'd been there before, so I'd been through a transition. I knew kind of when I looked at the company initially, wow, there's incredible strengths here, and there's tremendous potential and talent. But there's a lot of bad things happening inside the culture, inside the leadership, and I felt like, well, we could really reposition it. So I'd walk around saying, hey, look, we can't fall off the floor. We're the worst performing we're the worst performing game company in the business. In fact, my first company meeting, I put up a chart that said, hey, here's how this is going to unfold, and here's the steps that we're going to take in order to kind of turn the company around. And ultimately, the first thing was about getting the right leadership in and getting the right culture built, because it wasn't a place where people wanted to go to do the best work of their career. It just wasn't rewarded. And that was part of the thing when I remember when I was at EA was when you had hot teams that they had great chemistry, great culture, that's when you got great stuff. People that naturally roll out of bed wanting to do great things is what you want, right? Executive producers who are not a pain in the ass, it is a sign to me that I got the wrong executive producer. Because if they're a pain in the ass, it usually means they're trying to do something spectacular, right? As opposed to, hey, what should I build? I always knew I was screwed when that happened. But when I thought about Zynga and I looked at Zynga, and we can get into that in more detail. But those were some of the things at EA that really armed me in the early days to kind of be pretty relaxed, not relaxed in a disrespectful way, but the ups and downs and the drama wasn't important to me.
Yeah.
There was a North Star we were going to go after, and we got into position for that.
How do you get out of that cultural death spiral when you're like at the bottom? I had one of my friends, CEO Reddit. He came back. He was the founder, and then left for a long time. And he came back and walked into a place that they're like very unreceptive.
Right.
It's not working well. He hadn't hired the team. So when you're like, you're at the bottom and you're not they say A players attract A players and B players attract C players, right? And you're at the bottom, and like, how do you do that reset?
First things first is I don't believe it's used like a military thing. There are no bad soldiers, only bad officers.
No.
So for me, it's all about leadership. And so you got to bring in people who are A players, and they're going to recruit like crazy to bring in A players too. And they'll bring but at the stage of my career, I built a pretty good network, and I'd worked with a lot of people in the industry. So for me, it was first was, okay, who in the company wants to be here and has the passion for the mission? And what I found was not many at the top.
Yeah.
In fact, I fired 16 of 17 VPs, fired or they left.
Yeah.
It was a complete wholesale change. And I brought in Bernard Kim, who's somebody I worked with at EA, Jared Griffin, Matt Bromberg. I started to bring in people that I'd been through the turnaround at EA with, who I knew their value systems, I knew what they were good at, and I knew they could recruit. And so we started with that. And then the other thing I learned as I went around the company was there's incredible talent underneath this misaligned political layer of bad leadership. And so we went in and found people and basically promoted them 3 jobs. It's just like, you know what? That's what you were doing before. Now you're in a leadership position because you're demonstrating awesome work ethic, great insights, and you're committed to the company. Let's go, right? And so there were a lot of wins for people down inside the organization that had been doing great stuff, but had just not been recognized or weren't getting it done for a bunch of different reasons. And so we started to put together a whole bunch of great momentum around these stories of new people coming in, bringing new people, taking people that had been at Zynga for a long time and giving them new opportunities. And the first rule of a turnaround is you want to accrue small wins that then build into momentum.
Yeah.
And when you always see the turnaround happening internally before you see it externally. And so that was kind of the first thing was, fix the culture.
Yeah. A lot of the values reset, it sounds like it's just demonstrating that there's new behaviors or
right. You just walk around the company and you go into meetings and you set a tone for what matters and what you're not going to, really importantly is not what you're not going to tolerate. So if I saw behavior, I would go, and I called it a corrective interview. Something I learned from Larry Probst, VA, where if you see something egregious, like really poor leadership or politics or something that's just not okay, you put him in the room immediately and you say, look, here's what I'm seeing. Tell me why you did that. And you say, this is why this is not acceptable. And if you do it again, you're out.
Yeah.
And you have to in a turnaround, time is really brutal.
You're just really direct.
You have
there's no time.
You're not disrespectful or a tyrant. You're just like, look, this is where we're going. Are you in or not? And here's what I need to see happen. And then as you bring in leadership and they are aligned with that, that's an important part. The last piece of it was because compensation isn't always tied to culture, but it has a role in culture. Is that they had probably a dozen compensation different programs. So some game teams that actually win if the company lost, right? And so yeah, literally, so I had one guy threaten to sue me because I wouldn't spend the marketing he contractually was required to spend in the quarter because it was going to hurt the company, right? It was fun because it was crazy, but those are the types of things you go, okay, I got to fix the culture, do it through leadership, do it through promoting within, and then get the compensation fixed so that it's a shared win. Everybody wins when we're doing the right thing, and that you don't have these cross purposes things and resource fights. So that's not the total picture, but those are some of the first key moves that we made.
At the time you took over at Zynga, had the company fully acclimatized to the mobile era, or was it still transitioning from Facebook games?
It was still transitioning. The only mobile games they had started were pretty much, they had a bunch they had started, but there was poker and for Words with Friends essentially.
Okay.
The natural motion games hadn't released yet, and the focus for us was around getting to a strict prioritization of our resources. So the company was doing, I think it was about 700, a little over 700, almost 800 million in top line. And it was literally spitting out $17 million, right? So somehow $700 million went to 17, and you're in a high margin business. You're in a business that is growing explosively in mobile at that time. So you had a leaky bucket, and you had to go back up through the whole P&L. And you're like, okay, where is this miss? What's going on? And there was, Mark had just come back because he had come back and removed the former CEO and was starting to get this turnaround going, and he was making all the right moves. But it wasn't one of the things that he was wanting to do. He wanted to bring in an operator like myself who could actually accelerate some of those things. And he and I had a pretty good partnership. We met he recruited me to the board initially. So I saw some of the stuff he was doing, and I just kind of accelerated some of it and added some things, right? And first off, it was like rigorous prioritization. Best and brightest people in the company go on the biggest ideas without mercy, right? And the other thing was everybody wanted to build new games and not work on live games. So you had to make live operations and development, you had to make that elite and cool, because what was happening is success was I don't work on making Words with Friends grow week over week. Success is I get to work on some hobby project on the side that might or might not make it, right? And so we basically shut down probably 100 plus projects that were underway, focused the best and the brightest on those things, reinvigorated where we had, really doubled down on where we had heat, and then just got out of things that, were not mission critical. And that was the first stage of the turnaround, was unlock the value through better execution. It sounds like a, business school term, but honestly, when you're doing 700 million top line and 17's coming out the bottom, that's usually the first good step. Is most businesses in the mobile space at that time were doing 20, 30% margins on the bottom, right? And I made this speech to the company about, hey, look, running a company is like playing a game. You have a set of resources, you have a game board, a market, you have competitors, and you got to set a strategy and win. And one of the ways that you keep score is your EBITDA, right? How good are you with your resources? That's a measurement of how good you are with your strategies and your resource execution, is how much comes out the bottom. Right. And so I didn't feel like that was an overly CFO thing to say. It was more like, hey, we got to be smarter about how we deploy, how we build, how we create, and how we market. And this is a measure for it to tell us. And I put up the chart. I had Activision, EA, Playtika, everybody up there, and then us, and we were at the bottom, of course. And I said, let's just get into the conversation with 20%. Let's just march inland on that. I think we can do it. We have the resources in house. We don't need to raise capital. I mean, when we got there, we had, I think, $1 billion in cash. We had a beautiful building that we owned. And if you took all that away, our enterprise value was like 200 million, right? So it was, for me, it was just a fantastic opportunity. I looked at that and I was like, oh man, we can go to town if we can put the right strategy together and execute. And so those were some of the kind of first steps that we did when we looked at it.
And did you know going in that M&A would be a big part of that strategy?
Yeah.
Did you execute on that immediately, or did you stabilize internal staff first?
Stabilize the patient. Right. So, and you have to build credibility with your board that you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Right. So Mark, Ben Gordon called me up when I retired from EA and he said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I said, "Nothing. I'm thinking about getting a history degree and I'm hiking and doing bucket list stuff, coaching my kids' soccer teams." Yeah. And he's like, "Why don't you join a board?"
Yeah.
And he said, "How about the Zynga guys?" I'm like, "Zynga? Whoa. I hadn't really thought about them and because they had peaked and dropped." And I said, "Oh, why don't you meet Mark?" So I met Mark for a coffee that was supposed to be like 30 minutes in the city and ended up being like 2 hours. And we just clicked, he was the entrepreneur and I was, a game operator guy. Right. And so he might see 6 hills ahead, but I had a better sense of how to get over the first hill to get to the next hill, to get to the next hill and turn the vision into a reality. Right. And so we just clicked and we had really complementary skill sets. And so I worked on his board for probably 4 months before they offered me the job. And God is my witness. I didn't join to become CEO. I swear to God. But I fell in love with the company. Well, I was supposed to come in once a week and meet with the game team, give them some feedback. One day became 2 days, became 3 days. I was traveling to Europe to see the studios there. And I just remembered why I got in the games business, which is, sitting down with a game team and hearing their ideas about what they're going to build, the creativity, the technology, the complexity. That's my thing. That's what I've chosen to spend my life on, and I love it. And so I fell back in love with that. Wouldn't it be cool if we did this in the game team room, right? And so when they offered me the job, I was like, oh yeah, this will be awesome. And then the business brain part was well underway, which is growing market, fantastic capital table. We have tons of cash and the ability to get cash, with great brands, awesome publishing platform. Product management and data science off the charts, industry best, right? Everybody tries to recruit Zynga PMs. And I said, well, the problem is we don't have game teams. We don't have a studio in the talent or studio talent. We had science in spades, but we didn't have enough art, and that kind of balance of what games are in science. So that's when it was very early on for me was culture, capital allocation would be the boring business case study that you would write on this one. And it was about how do I use the capital to go find awesome teams and products that we can put on this incredible publishing platform and scale.
Gotcha. So that was kind of the impetus
the
for the
thesis
acquisition
day one,
strategy.
absolutely.
So you started looking like right as you were fixing the
Right.
culture.
And it was a very methodical process because we had a horrible reputation. So, people wouldn't necessarily take our calls. And we had to earn kind of why would this be a good place to go? And so some of the things that I had learned at EA, we flipped on its head, right? In terms of how do you like most acquisitions have great industrial logic and then they completely fall apart because of egos and integration. Right. So those were the two things I focused in on as we went out and looked at companies was, okay, how do we make the pitch that we're going to grow faster together? How do we make the pitch that joining Zynga will actually enable things for you to do more of? And a lot of these were Series A's companies that were now going to have to go raise a new series that, oh, I got to build a marketing department. Oh, I got to go build all this capability. And we'd say, hey, look, you can come in, get to be we were as a stock, we could also be generous with equity so that they would be, we liked it because we would be aligned with the company value and they would experience, the earnouts. But that kind of dynamic of Zynga works for you, we're going to grow faster together. Integration is going to be extraordinarily light. Public company American issues would be the minimum threshold. But I always found it odd that we would buy companies at EA and then turn them into EA. Take their logos off the building or say, hey, we know better. Here's what you should do. And it was just arrogance as opposed to enlightened self-interest, which is I'm buying this company because this talented group of people have created something I can't or haven't yet. Right. And so that was more the orientation that we had. And so Bernard and I and Jer and others we'd go out on the road and just build networks and talk to people. And we would play all of their games beforehand and we push their games through our data systems. So we would know how valuable their games were before we met them. So we were like, wow, if we had the Zynga publishing system with this idea, Merge Dragons, for example, how big could we make it? Like, what haven't they put in the game yet? Or what features or live operations techniques could they apply, and how big could we make it? So we'd have a commercial sense in our head, and we would play the games a lot, so that we would demonstrate that we were, authentically interested in the games. And then that's how we started to putting one after the other. And what we found after the first couple was the best salespeople were the companies we had acquired. It's like, don't believe us. Just talk to the Merge Dragons guys, talk to the Small Giant guys, and that created a momentum. And we won a lot of deals asymmetrically. Against bigger companies because we were fast and we were very flexible on how to bring the teams in and how to partner with them and how to ultimately create an economic argument that made sense for them.
And kudos to you guys. You were very early looking at Turkey, and I think a lot of Americans I found had a bit of a European blind spot. I was an investor in Europe, and oftentimes American investors would not think there was much of value there. But you guys, was Graham your first acquisition, first big one?
No, our first was the casual card group at Peak.
Oh, of course, yeah. So another Turkish studio.
So I meet
Yeah.
Sadar, who founded Peak at a GDC, came by Zynga, and we just hit it off. He's a larger than life guy. He's the guy who created gaming in Turkey, for all
Yeah.
intents and purposes. And he had these regional Middle Eastern card games that were just operating at 20+%, nice growers, not particularly strategic for a lot of people, but for us, back to that, hey, how do we move the margin up? This was a great subscale kind of plug and play, right? A tuck in. And so he wanted to sell that, divest it, so that he could fund Toon Blast and Toy Blast. And so he did. We came up with an arrangement, and that was our first acquisition. And so we bought a few little guys, a little of solitaire game called Harpin. It gave us some juice. We got to perfect our playbook for how do we integrate. And then Graham was the first big one.
Yeah.
And then after that, we started rolling.
I remember visiting their office in London, and they were they were a little bit upset because I think they like 7x their game in the year after you acquired them, but they were overall pretty happy. And the office was like gorgeous. I remember in London they have these like smoothies, innocent smoothies. They're super expensive, and they had a fridge of innocent smoothies. And I remember just being so blown away that a company would have a fridge of free innocent smoothies.
Our Turkish studios have a great custom where they all eat together. So they have cooks and folks putting together the culinary. And so at lunch, everybody gathers on a big table and sits. It's very communal and family-like. So Graham's got that, Peak's got that. They all have it. But we really liked going where our view is always, if things suck, attack. If people don't believe that an area's valuable, look at it again. And so I've always been driven by that. Is first blush reactions is not always correct. And so from my perspective, you had all these guys pouring money into the Ukraine and to Belarus at that time, as you know. And we felt like we would be the 15th company coming in on that. And in Turkey, we just met a few people that we really enjoyed. I loved the country, and we just fell in love with it and saw tons of opportunities and went for it.
Yeah, the first deal, I mean, even the first deal I worked on at Makers Fund was our investment in Dream Games, which was a 5 million on 25 round. And people thought that was crazy. It was like giving a bunch of Turkish guys that. And of course, it's like one of the best investment of my life for sure.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't take credit for it. And now, that seems very cheap in retrospect. But that was after you guys had already bought Graham and already bought Peaks.
Right. Yeah, Peak was a big deal. We did it during COVID.
I remember that, and that was a competitive deal. I remember a lot of the big American guys were looking at that, and
A couple Asian
won it
companies
out.
too. Yeah. So yeah, we won that asymmetrically. I think a lot of it had to do with the relationship we had built with Sadar, the track record that we had of culturally integrating without, disrupting.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we'd pitch like, hey, do you want to be a big player in the Zynga company, or do you want to be employee 30,005 at company X, right? These much larger players, where you're kind of an afterthought. Here, you're strategic. You're literally in the boardroom.
You also understood mobile, and I think I look at your former employer, EA's track record of mobile acquisitions after your time, and it's not been great. And so I do think that there's some cultural disconnect between EA's understanding of the business and like Blue's understanding of the business, perhaps, that led to less successful post-acquisition performance than your acquisitions.
Well, I it's hard for me to talk about it because I wasn't
would
there.
imagine,
But again, I think it goes back to the point I made earlier, which is you have to unlearn a lot of things that make you successful in console and PC to be successful in mobile. And sometimes cultures and leadership can't do that. And for me, it was existential at Zynga, right? And I'd had that finishing school of those last 2 years at EA on it. But yeah, it's difficult if you're not in mobile and you're coming at it from the first time. It's a little opaque.
Yeah.
You don't quite understand what's happening below the surface of the pond. And the smallest nuance in how you set up a UA campaign and how you price in the economy can destroy the whole business. And so I think that it is an expert field, and I think sometimes what you see happening in the business is the most successful players never had any experience in console and PC. They grew up as mobile people. They grew up like the Turkish environment. Their mobile's the only thing they enjoy on, play games on. It's starting to show up with some other games, but in general, I liked that opportunity. In fact, if you look at our organization right now, our biggest studios if are all in Europe.
Yeah. Can we talk about the flip side,
Sure.
the acquisition side, or when do you know How did you know it was the right time to sell the company?
I think there's a public company rule, which is, from a fiduciary, you have to, if you're approached,
Yeah.
you have to bring the deals forward and compare it against the internal plan. And we had an ambitious, internal plan. So, we'd gone from a couple hundred million in enterprise. We're at that point, I think we were around $8 or $10 billion. I can't remember exactly which. And we started getting interest from a variety of parties in the company. We were growing fast. Playtika was growing fast. There had been a bunch of companies that had recently gone public, like Roblox and others. So the category was hot, and the market was 200 billion. Half of it was mobile, and there's companies out there that just had no position in mobile, and they felt that this was an opportunity for them to do that. And we looked at a variety of deals and compared them against our internal plan, and Take Two was the right company for us at the time, to be able to go after the ultimate mission, which is we wanted to be the largest game company in the world, the most important. We had this idea we want to be $100 billion big. Now, when you're 200 million in enterprise, it sounds laughable, but that's what gets you out of bed in the morning.
Yeah.
Right. It's not that you want to hit your next quarter's guidance, and so that's important, but not the thing. So ultimately, we found with Take Two is we had a company that was really excited about getting into mobile. They had a couple of assets like Nordeus and Social Point that they had just started understanding. And culturally, they fit really well in terms of the model. Take Two does an amazing job running studio. I mean, look at Rockstar and 2K.
No.
They get to be who they are. They're culturally autonomous. They are creatively autonomous. They align with Take Two on what the goals are for the business and their role in that, and then it's kind of hands off and off we go. Right. Strauss is very involved and engaged in the business, but it's in a way that is complementary as opposed to checking homework or invasive, right?
Yeah.
And so what I found was Zynga wanted to continue to pursue its goal, and we felt that we could pursue that goal more effectively with a larger partner and more resources and a more availability to IP. So that was the thesis behind the deal, and the economics made sense. And what's surprising about it was the integration went extraordinarily easy. I thought a bunch of Californians and a bunch of New Yorkers were gonna clash a bit, and it was pretty straightforward up front. We just flipped our acquisition book on its head and just said, okay, well, this is what we do when we acquire. How would we want to be acquired? And we said, here's the religious issues. Here's the stuff we're fine with. We understand the synergies. We've been through this. We understand. And they were great about it, right? They had their issues, and we were able to basically get it done in record time. And since then, we've been, in a position where there's a lot of things that we do that the larger organizations learning from, a lot of things that they do and that we've incorporated, and it's gone very smoothly. So it's a lot of, and we're starting to pursue the dream in a little bit different way. It allows us to think a little bit more long term and a little bit more. We can take a little bit more risk, and we don't have to focus resources, energy on things that aren't necessarily as important. So from that standpoint, it's gone very well.
I'm curious on the ad tech question, a kind of related question about your acquisitions at Zynga. Like, to what extent did you have a kind of preconceived portfolio strategy of like covering your bases when, for example, you had the match category with Zynga with Peak. You then acquired Rollic, which is a great hyper casual developer. You had Midcore with Empires and Puzzles. To what extent was that kind of a preconceived strategy that you wanted to have in end-to-end coverage of genre, or were your acquisitions more like opportunistic, case by case?
They were all talent based. So I have never read a genre analysis that has been useful at all in terms of forward-thinking offensive moves. It's always backwards looking. The biggest and best hits are genre mashups. Ultimately, every acquisition, from my perspective, is about talent and culture. And if it happens to be in the same category as something that we're in, You understand if it's cannibalistic or not, but at the end of the day, sometimes even that's overthought. So we just find hot teams that were in categories that um, were useful to kind of organize yourself around, but not the determinant variable. The determinant variable was absolutely, is Timo and the team at Small Giant, are they badasses? And do they have a business that we can grow effectively together and or peak, with Omer and Sidar and those guys. It was in Raleigh with Burak. It was just each one of those cases. We found great leadership, great culture, and then products that fit greatly into our portfolio. It's a difficult portfolio to manage because it is in so many categories. But if you flip it around, it's a great categories to be in because you get a lot of data. So the data, a lot of times you have to step it back from Zynga and say, okay, don't think of it as a game company. Think of it as a data company. What's the data product that we're producing, and how do we generate value out of that data? And so our data science teams and are constantly looking at the enterprise overall and looking at trends outside of an individual studio, but looking enterprise wide. And the number of transactions, the number of game events that we're prosecuting, the amount of things that we see are very valuable for the decision making that we make against whether it's UA campaigns or retargeting or what to try next.
Does that kind of comprehensive view also apply to actual user acquisition? And there's a kind of nice theoretical idea of creating an internal ad network, and in theory, you could look at Zynga's portfolio and say, well, no one should ever have to leave this. You could, bring someone in with Rollick, and then depending on the user, send them to casual farming sims or casino. Is that something that in practice is realizable, or is that kind of a nice McKinsey idea?
I think it's a nice McKinsey idea. I think what it does work on is subgroupings. A 35-year-old woman from Nebraska is probably not going to play CSR as much as she's likely to play Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Right. So if you can be smart about who it is, that's where it seems to work on a few games, a handful of games. It's better to do a targeted, specific type of CRM activity as opposed to, well, I don't know how many times I've gotten the pitch. Well, here's our cross promo engine, and we're just going to slide these in. We're going to look at the LTVs of the cross promo versus the ad we could sell. Yeah, we've tried that a bunch of times. It's kind of the white whale, but it does work in instances sometimes, and especially if you find an affinity overlap between the types of people playing the games.
Yeah, and it's been tried from the content side. Like you guys and then AppLovin are obviously divesting their content portfolio now,
Right.
which this speaks to the
Yeah, so they're on one end of the block, we're on the other end, and we came to the same conclusion for
Yeah.
different reasons, right? So, and again, with what we found with ad tech was we have scale data advantage, but then to actually go out and do that in mediation and UA was just a bridge too far, and there were already players like AppLovin's crushing it that were in a position to be able to do that, and so sometimes you have to have that realization, self awareness, to say, okay, look, this is not happening for whatever reason. I need to be able to do the right thing for the people and divest, but at the same time, what are my options strategically? Can I go partner and do a strategic deal with somebody or try it a different way? And you have to be really flexible and nimble that way and mobile because it's so fast moving and there's so many, kind of things that come along that can be fatal if you don't deal with them correctly. That I think you have to be sharp and fast with it.
Yeah, it's easy to get distracted in
Yeah.
the industry too. I think perhaps where the portfolio approach or like the kind of combined approach has maybe yielded more benefits is direct to consumer in that you've managed to centralize some of those efforts. I'd love to hear from you about when you first started to think about D2C in the games industry, which I would imagine was at EA, which I think has like a kind of a very prescient or like a very kind of prescient approach to D2C. At least you guys were thinking about it very early, even if execution didn't go so well. So I'd be interested to know through your career how you've thought about distribution.
Well, it started with I was around when EA was still at distributors, and a strategic advantage was they built a direct sales force, and then we built direct relationship with the retailers, and then we did category captains, where we ran the categories with the buyers at Walmart, Best Buy, and Target. And so if you're able to generate and build that capability, it's an unbelievable multiplier on your content teams. We could sell more of any game into the shelves at EA than anybody, and it was because of that integration of sales, retail, marketing and into a fully integrated publishing concept. So at a very early part of my career, I learned that yeah, you can have the greatest game in the world, but if the marketing sucks and it can't reach the shelves, oh, tough luck, right? And so you had to be a winner on both sides of the business. And so when we get to mobile or PC, actually, I mean, you look at Roblox or Steam. Those are my two favorite companies right now in the industry. I think they're unbelievable innovators, and the scale and power that they generate now is a lot of it's distribution. There's great content there, but their ability to generate audience, serve audience, is just incredible. And so when you look at mobile, at one point in time, Apple and Google were fantastic partners. They would generate tons of installs off of organics, but they haven't really shown a great track record recently of being a value add to the business. There's new policies and things that they implement that actually are difficult for us to manage the business. So, when you think about it, you want to always have that direct relationship with your player. And until very recently, we hadn't had that opportunity on mobile because of the platform dynamics and the regulatory environment. But now that that's started to shift, any little crack we saw, we went after it. And we also had the I wasn't at the company at the time, but the Facebook experience was particularly telling on Mark and the board and the culture of 1 minute being, massive, the next minute with an algorithm change, everything's changed, right? So we've always had that paranoia about it, and anytime we get a crack, we're gonna try and drive a truck through it. So as the platforms have opened up and we've seen the opportunity to build direct relationships with players, we've gone hardcore after it. Now, one of the best kept secrets of the acquisition with Take Two was we were in a position of building out a whole bunch of new technology around a mobile direct store. And when we joined Take Two, we found that they had built a whole bunch of technology. It was exactly transferable for other platforms and a little bit for mobile. So we actually were able to slam the two teams together, and we went much faster as a result. That was one of the hidden synergies that we didn't know about until we got actually in the mix. And so that's where we started to see a real kick up in mobile direct. And like I said before and earlier in our conversation, it's been a profound growth driver for us. And what's beautiful half about it is you don't to have one monolithic store where it's here's the dog and the red logo and the Zynga.com store. We don't believe in doing that. We federate it so every store is unique to the product, but the back end is obviously uniform and the tools are there such that the game teams can optimize the CRM experience for each individual player.
And how have you thought about making this something that benefits players and that players are excited about? And like,
Well, we
what?
don't have to pay a tax,
Yeah.
and so you can give them better value.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I don't mind paying a platform if I get value, but I don't get any organics anymore. And so what am I paying for, right? We have my own payment systems. So from my perspective, it's a little unbalanced now. So I don't feel so bad when a customer comes to us directly through the appropriate means, through playing fair, that will give them a deal. And they get to understand that, and that incentivizes them to continue to work with us.
Is this something you see expanding into most genres, or do you think that? I'm curious how you see this growing in the future. Like, for example, is there a world in which someone like Peak ends up doing this more if it's unlikely to be some of the higher friction stuff like web stores, but perhaps do you see like side loading opening up more, APKs becoming more popular?
APKs are doing pretty well. The sky's the limit. I think it's just this is the first 30 minutes of the movie, or maybe in the first 3 minutes of the movie. So there's a lot more to unfold here that I think is going to be happening. Better CRM, better tools, better stores, players that have gotten used to it and understand it and like it. Some categories are more have a higher propensity to convert, like ARPGs or core games. Casual puzzle, or people argue don't. It's not been our experience. The dynamic from my perspective is those players haven't been really. You're giving them better value. Ultimately, they just want more value and more fun for their money. So if you can demonstrate that, and that's CRM and time, it takes time to kind of break through on that. I think ultimately it's going to be pretty good. I mean, if you look at the percentages, we've had some games that have done north of 40%. Um, and you see other kind of percentages from other companies that have been publicly announced that we're in the conversation on. So if you add that to the sensor tower numbers, and
Yes.
then throw ads on top of that, all of a sudden you're like, hey, mobile doesn't suck so much.
No, I agree. And I think that the more we're seeing
And oh,
studios,
by the way, China is wildly underestimated. It's probably 50% bigger than it is.
oh, you think?
Yeah, I do.
Do you think I mean, that was a challenge for a while with the Chinese government's disposition to games. Is that
Right.
something you've seen change in the last year?
I don't know. I'm hopeful that it'll start to open up and it will have faster times to market. But in general, I think just looking at talking to some of the companies and seeing the data that's presented publicly, I think the Chinese market is currently underestimated.
Yeah, from what we can glean from Steam reviews, and that data is always interesting to see the explosion in the number of
Right.
Chinese language.
That's been
Steam reviews.
particularly interesting recently is China and Steam.
We're seeing like the more studios start to think about their distribution strategy and their direct consumer offerings as kind of part of their product, and start thinking about how they can, really add engagement to their players' overall experience. I think some studios are surprising themselves with their opportunities. Even the casual merge games, for example, have like, often very humorous lore and like humorous settings and narratives that they can expand upon in direct consumer ways that I think, will make those more like holistic and strong products and unlock that channel like
Right.
much further.
Right. So that, yeah, that's one of the areas of optimism for me is certainly the underlying dynamics. There's more there than people are giving it credit. And you got another billion gamers that are coming online in Africa, South America, South Asia. They don't quite have the purchasing power yet, but the activity's there, the interest is there. So from a long-term standpoint, if your business is getting more direct, there's more people playing every day than there were yesterday. And you have some of these underlying capabilities starting to become effective. Like, AI might not be the best thing in the world right now on a Friday afternoon, but it's certainly going to be powerful. And it's starting to pick up speed and sense. So you're going to get more efficiency, more leverage. So I feel like there's a lot of long-term growth drivers in here that while it might not be a 20% per year growth business like it was in the heyday, it's $200 billion business that's still growing decent single digits to high single digits, and it's got good hardware stories coming. I like it. I mean, I'm feeling optimistic.
So I wanted to touch on, you brought the AI angle up when we are talking about GDC. What are some of the ways that you're seeing AI manifest in gaming right now?
Well, I think we're in the hype cycle, and so there's a lot again like, hey, it's going to do this, it's going to do that, but in practice, it's not quite.
Yeah,
getting
what's
it
real
done.
right now
What's real
inside?
for us is
Yeah.
it's fantastic in prototyping,
Yeah.
visualization, early testing. We can throw together stuff really fast, get signal back from the market without spending a ton of money on production ready assets. So that's kind of helpful. It's really good with how we're using customer service agents as hey, this game event occurred. The first wave is AI, and it's actually pretty good.
Yeah.
Code completion's been pretty mixed.
That's what I've heard.
I,
Yeah.
I think there's probably a third of the engineers that like it, and there's another 2/3 that say it actually creates more work than for me than if I just did it myself. So we'll see. We're starting to use it with analytics and PM work. We're kind of looking at how do the reporting chains if we use AI to compose and look at some of the low level analytics and findings, and then have people come in over the top of it. We've used it for puzzle generation in puzzle games.
Did you train your
So-
own models for that?
Yeah, it's all internal.
Yeah.
So we're Take-Two's extremely conservative on how we interact with external LLMs. So
Yeah, you don't want to dump all your data into
exactly.
like,
It's very unclear on
someone else.
yeah. So we don't.
Yeah.
We're taking the slower road on
Yeah.
that front, but it's actually forcing us to be a lot more crisp and sharp about the use case.
Yeah, where you want to
analysis.
invest in building something internally.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a revolution. It's going to be incredible. Having been around for a while,
You've been through a couple hype cycles.
I've been through a couple of boom busts.
Yeah.
I think maybe we'll do a couple boom busts on AI,
Yeah.
and eventually it'll be in a position where the optimist in me says if you're able to create these tools the way that people are envisioning them right now, it means people will be able to create more content faster,
Yeah, for sure.
cheaper. So if you look at the industry right now, the cost management issue is profound. It's difficult to invest in. It's high risk. Only the big companies who are specialized in it can build a $300 million video game for PS5. If you can take any of that cost and time out of that, that's going to allow you to build more games. Look at somebody coming into the industry. How many games, if they're a console developer, are they going to work on in their career? You know,
Yeah.
if they're 5-year life cycle games, it's probably like 3 or 4. You know, I worked on 3 or 4 games my first summer. At EA, it's probably at 8. Different time, but I think if you can start to think about ways that AI tools are going to start to attack those issues over time, I think it's really interesting, and I think it's going to be a huge growth driver for the indie community.
Yeah.
So basically the way I look at it right now is you've got AAA, and then you got indies, and there's no middle class anymore in terms of developers and publishers. And from my perspective, that's just kind of how it is. And then you say, well, how does AI help either? And it basically is going to be more output, cheaper, faster, which is good for customers because they're going to get more games to play. And it means for creators and developers, they can create more things and try more things. Is it have very dangerous applications? Absolutely. That we have to think about and be very thoughtful about. But the horse is out of the barn. You're not bringing it back in. So you might as well wrap your head around how do we use it in an ethical and effective manner, as opposed to we're not going to do it.
Do you think it can bring that kind of middle class of games back because it lowers the costs, or is that
It could cause a reemergence of that class of company, but that's going to take some time.
Yeah, I would say I'm seeing some AI skeptics from the venture community be more and more impressed by what they're seeing. I think that the more radical uses of AI as like a new way to create interactivity those are like the more speculative bets, but I think is an interesting thing to keep an eye on. Like the ability for this to essentially function as an engine. Like, I think that the use case for D&D, for example, like Dungeon Masters, is kind of phenomenal, where you don't need a fully interactive environment, but you just need to generate visuals very rapidly and somewhat cosmetically. I think some of those applications I'm really excited about. But I think we're a while away from AIs being able to create objects with physics or really create things that would be production ready, which is a huge blocker for them having the most radical applications.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. And I think the one thing I would add to that is if you're really going to get into these more exotic and pushing the envelope, you have to restructure your whole thinking around talent and organization. Yeah, I mean, you have to design the company with AI doing huge parts of the company. Whereas now it's, oh, we're just going to make a faster horse, right? We're going to do what we're doing. We're just going to do it faster. So I think you're going to have to say, what happens if I don't have any of this type of person on the team and it's strictly handled by AI? And reorganize your entire operating concept around that. I don't know where that goes exactly, but if it's going to be truly profound, I think you have to think about the talent implications and how you organize and lead, where AI is doing a lot of the work. And I think that's further out, but there'll be a new type of organizational design in the industry around that.
So our final question is always,
Yeah.
The podcast is called Secret Stash. So we ask guests to share a secret, from their career or something new. I don't know if you can think of one, secret from the industry, maybe.
I didn't kill Commander Shepard. That's kind of random, but Mass Effect 3.
Yeah.
Right. Great series. I love that. Was one of my favorite jobs. Was EA Games. We're working on Dead Space, Mass Effect, Battlefield. It was awesome. We get to the Mass Effect series, this third one. The BioWare team has this beautiful narrative arc where Commander Shepard dies as an act of sacrifice to save the universe. And we were like, you got to be kidding me. Why are you going to kill this guy? You know how hard it is to make a video game character people will dress up at Comic-Con as? He's got his ship. It's like Kirk and Enterprise. It's like we got the Normandy and Commander Shepard. So we're arguing with them, like, can't we just keep him around? We'll probably get another, because we're like the EA execs, right? We're the evil commercial guys.
Value.
Right. And I'm the president of that label, right? And so I'm talking to my boss at the time, like, how do I get these guys not to kill this guy? So we did the right thing. We said, well, okay, we're not going to legislate or edit what you're doing. It's your story. You've created 90 rated games. It's spectacular. You guys go ahead and do it. So they do it. And all of a sudden I got literally death threats that I killed Commander Shepard. And all the EA guys, and then you go on the internet, it's like the conspiracy theory. EA guys killed Commander Shepard.
Oh no.
They made BioWare do this. Da, 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 da. And we're all in San Mateo. We're all like, you got to be kidding me. Like we were the ones saying, don't kill him because this is our Sonic, right? This is our guy. Our Lara Croft. And so that was the funny one for me. There's a million of those stories, like when you're in the room where it happens, like remember the play, and then you hear this conspiracy theory over afterwards, like what really happened. You're like,
funny.
that's not at all how it happened. But yeah, Commander Shepard's the one that Peter Moore and I were getting death threats, like we'll kill you. We're gonna you deserve to die. And EA are evil, and like, oh man. And that was the year we won worst company in the world. For the second time. It was Commander Shepard's death.
That's what did it. I mean, that's an incredible story. Frank, thank you so much for joining us.
No, I enjoyed it.
That was
Thank you,
so
guys.
much fun.
Yeah, it's great.